YouTube, hello, hey, how's it going? Let's talk about this Lucilius guy. You having a hard time beating this dude consistently? Well, guess what? You're not alone. I get dozens of people stopping in the stream with their grievances, how hard he can be, how some of his phases are super rough, or how little tears they're getting, which I have to assume just means they're struggling to complete the mission reliably enough that anytime they do, it's gotta hurt super bad when you see that you've got no tears as a reward. Well, I'm here to put an end to that, or at least help you figure out what you could be doing differently to try and beat this dude up so he stops giving you problems. I'll be like your big brother. Make sure the school bully never even looks in your direction again. Here's what we're gonna go over. First, we'll talk about sigils and which ones you should be using or considering when going up against this doofus, since they will help you out tremendously. Second, we'll discuss team composition. This is gonna refer to how you're going to prep your CPUs by assigning certain skills and sigils. And we'll briefly talk about squatting up with other players and what you can do to enhance the overall mission success, regardless of who might not be carrying their weight. And third will be the most extensive part, where we talk about overall gameplay strategy. This will include dealing with the mini games Lucy likes to throw at us, the placement and dodge timings for certain attacks, and why it's super important to learn how to perfect dodge them, and why you should be paying attention to Lucy's health percentage. So let's begin with sigils. At least starting out, and feel free to continue using these types of sigils for as long as you'd like, but here are some that I would highly recommend and why. As usual, I like to preface that I understand not everyone will have the best of the best when it comes to sigils, so I'm only going to mention what makes the real difference in terms of success rate. Starting with flight over fight. It's not exactly a common sigil, as this can only be obtained from curios, but it definitely isn't the rarest. This isn't exactly required, but the point of this guide is to help you get more consistent clears, and this can be done without flight over fight, but obviously that makes things much more difficult. So if you have this sigil, I would highly recommend putting it on, and I'll be going over dodge timings in this video as well, so this sigil will help with that tremendously. Next would be improved dodge. This sigil is incredibly useful, especially for when you're trying to learn certain dodge timings, and it will allow you to be less punished for panicking or making some mistakes. I will admit, these two sigils combined definitely make the game feel a bit more trivial, but ultimately, you want to be able to get these sigils out of your build in exchange for more utility and damage, but that's not something we need to worry about at the moment. Next would be nimble onslaught. If you're able to, having this sigil at max provides an immense benefit towards your SBA gain and even contributes some cooldown for your skills too. But the main thing to take away is how often you'll have your SBA ready to fire off. This sigil is still effective even by having only one equipped as a trait level 16 sigil, but like I said, if you can somehow manage to fit it in to be max level 30, that should help you quite a bit. Each time you get a perfect dodge with this sigil equipped, you'll gain a flat 5% SBA gain at max level. So considering the previously mentioned sigils, you should already have an idea of how this plays out. Not only will you be perfect dodging most attacks, but you'll also be gaining that precious SBA needed to interrupt the Paradise charge at the same time. This is definitely a strategy that should be squeezed to its fullest, and so I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by that. At level 16, you're granted an additional plus 2 seconds of invincibility, and at max, it's 3 seconds. Because of the new timing to your invincibility, you'll want to start looking for every opportunity to gain SBA by getting a perfect dodge. At level 16, you're granted an additional plus 2 seconds of invincibility, and at max, it's 3 seconds. The reason that's important to mention is because you're going to be trying to look for every opportunity you can to try and get as many perfect dodges as possible. Here's an example of nimble onslaught at level 16, where I get the most amount of dodges you can during these attacks. And if you have it at level 16 as well, then the timing is going to be exactly the same for you, so you'll be able to replicate this exactly. And I'm sure you'll also find opportunities yourself that you feel you're maximizing its full potential. The idea is simply to get the dodges as soon as you can, so that you can have another perfect dodge available as soon as possible. Lastly would be Potion Hoarder. It's just super helpful for clearing and getting rid of the headache of having to sit there waiting for a revive anytime you make a slight mistake. And having 3 revive potions will oftentimes decide if you'll be able to complete the quest at all. A huge tip for this though, make sure you're only really using the revival when it looks like your team is super far from you, or if there's several attacks happening on the field at once. Otherwise, it's probably best to let your team revive you, and if they have nimble onslaught or any other invincibility prolonging sigils, then it's likely the revival process will go uninterrupted most of the time. Let's move on to team composition. In terms of which CPUs to bring, Obviously prioritize whichever ones you have a fully awakened or nearly fully awakened terminus weapon for, as that will speed up the fight much more than any of the other weapons. Then sort through their skills and find any that have to do with dealing a high amount of stun. This alone won't guarantee meeting the stun check during Lucy's Paradise charge, but that's why we want to equip them with stun sigils as well. Some really good ones would be stun power plus with damage cap as its secondary. But if you don't have this, obviously just stun power plus with some sort of secondary. Some good ones would be nimble onslaught, as CPUs are incredible at dodging. This will provide them with SBA gain, meaning they'll have it much more often and also ready to fire whenever you need it. A couple little tips. One is being cautious of skills and sigils that give stout heart to CPUs. I don't know if this has been fixed yet or whatever, but CPUs will often not dodge attacks during stout heart buffs, and this leads to them dying a lot more. And two, I'd recommend swapping your team's SBA to auto, as this will help out a great deal, especially if they're managing to get their SBA full before you. If for some reason you find it more beneficial to turn this off of auto, then by all means do what works best for you. Alright, let's move on to overall gameplay strategy. First, we'll talk about dodge timing. Remember, with Nimble Onslaught, we're gaining a flat percentage of SBA gain for each perfect dodge we land. So, if you really want to maximize the gain on this, it's important to get the earliest hitbox you can in a series of attacks, so that you can get as many opportunities as possible. Let's talk about timing your dodges. Remember, with Nimble Onslaught, we're gaining a flat percentage of SBA gain for each perfect dodge we land. So, if you really want to maximize the gain on this, it's important to get the earliest hitbox you can in a series of attacks so that you can get as many opportunities as possible. Basically, if you perfect dodge midway through an attack, by the time the last very predictable pattern starts to head your way, you might still be invincible and you'll have missed that easy opportunity. Instead, we want to try and go for the earliest possible points in a sequence and get as many perfect dodges as possible. But keep in mind, you don't have to be diligent about every single one of the attack sequences. You can sort of find where you're most comfortable, since dying for something super difficult is hardly worth the payoff. So comfort first, then look for ways to maximize those gains. The very first Paradise Lost when you start the mission is always going to be the same. This can be mastered without flight or fight, but you'll stand a much better chance at it with this. Here's an example of the very start of the fight. I was working on a video for this, and just watching the background for when I see a star shine. That means this section of the field is going to be hit next. After that, I just worry about the circles on the ground. Now with the few seconds of invincibility, you can either count in your head, or simply do as I do and start spamming dodge at the edge as the expiration feels like it's about to hit. By sitting in one corner, you force all the danger circles to spawn underneath you, creating a constant hitbox of attacks for you to simply be mid-dodge and trigger your perfect dodge. Now, without flight over fight, it's a bit more challenging, but you want the circles to chase you in a fairly spread out pattern so that you can visually see the older circles as they're completely filled and exploding. By doing this, you allow yourself the ability to run towards a circle as it's about to pop and simply dodge as it's finished filling completely. Here are a few other examples where you can take advantage of perfect dodging. During 7 Trumpets, the circle minigame mostly has you dodging over the incoming circle wave, but I'll sometimes intentionally run over the incorrect circle to trigger a free perfect dodge. At the start of the colored marble minigame during 7 Trumpets, the center will spawn the giant marbles, and this actually acts as a hitbox you can easily react to. Near the end of the mission, Lucy will cast Gopherwood Arc. This is one that took me a bit to get the hang of, but hopefully by seeing my timing, you'll understand it fairly quickly. You'll always spawn at the same location, so you can attempt to get the very first dodge by moving forward and to the left a little bit, then dodging as Lucy flies towards you. If you miss this first one, it's not a big deal. You can sort of gamble for the next attempt, but even this isn't a huge deal if you miss it. Easy one to get, and the one I would highly recommend landing, is when he starts to do a square-like pattern. The first one he does, closest to the spawn location, is off the platform, and I've had no luck landing the perfect dodge on it, but the next closest one is pretty easy to land. After you see the line appear, you just need to dodge shortly after that. With flight over fight, I believe you can usually land the perfect by dodging as soon as you see the line, so there's lots of room for you here. Now the next pattern has floor indicators for when you need to dodge. The time in which your invincibility ends will obviously vary depending on when you got it last, but it's usually a safe bet to try and activate it off the very first line you see as it fills up. And if you don't get it there, you would obviously aim for the very next one. If this is done early enough, you should be able to get a second perfect dodge near the very end of this attack, so that's even more SBA in your pocket. In this footage, I'm only using trait level 16 Nimble Onslaught, so my invincibility is only 2 seconds longer. So if you have 3 seconds or more, it shouldn't be that much different. And if you plan to stick to 3 seconds, then it's a good idea to figure out which ones you can do the earliest to try and get as many as possible before this entire attack sequence ends, so that you can repeat the same dodge pattern each time. But for this example, you'll see I hit the gamble, and just for consistency's sake, you'll see me input the dodge timing for the super easy one I mentioned right here, but because I was already invincible, I took the time to line myself up with his next route and land a dodge there. Onto the next part of your overall gameplay strategy. When should I worry? The first time Lucy starts charging Paradise Lost, your whole team needs to do their SBAs all together since it needs a full chain burst to deactivate. But for the rest of the Paradise charges, you only need a stun check or a single SBA to end the cast. This is why it's a good idea if your character has a stun skill to hold off on using that skill when the cast is about to start. At first, I was being very conservative with my stun skill as I didn't want to mess up when I needed it most. Eventually, I started to find when it's okay to use these skills so that I'm not holding on to them for longer than I needed to. Lucy will begin charging his Paradise Lost after he casts 7 trumpets and has your team doing all those minigames. After the final minigame, you'll immediately begin charging Paradise Lost. This is the one where everyone needs to have their SBAs ready. Don't fret if some players don't have their SBA ready at this point. Just pay attention to that, and if you see someone doesn't have their SBA, then you sort of want to take your time during this part and just deal as much damage as you can, let everyone catch up on their SBA gauge, and just kind of keep beating them up. The next time can vary, depending on how much damage is being done. You'll eventually attempt to begin charging. This can obviously be suspended with SBAs and link time to give you more time to deal with him before he begins charging. He doesn't immediately cast his Paradise Lost after he transforms, so it's generally a good idea to hold on to your stun skills whenever there isn't an SBA available. I'm not 100% certain, but I think the Paradise Lost charge will begin to charge faster and faster each time he does it. So if you're barely meeting that stun check at some point, it's a good idea to consider that you probably won't be meeting it from here on out, and that you can just let all your skills rip. But if you are meeting them at a decent pace, then it's probably wise to consider being conservative with them. Now let's talk about the minigames. The first minigame is called Stigma, where rotating colored circles will move in a circular pattern on the floor. Whichever is the first color to be stepped on, you must then step on all the remaining circles of that color. It's fairly simple, but time is of the essence, so be quick about it. My biggest tip for this is to always start on the outer circles first. This makes it much easier to find the next ones, and you'll be moving away from the damaging circle that moves towards the center. The next minigame is the colored marbles. For this one, it's definitely a good idea to mainly stick to one side, away from the other 3 players, and just worry about clearing your marble, and also being mindful of hitting the big marble in the middle to activate the next set. If you have a ranged player on the team, you can usually rely on them to do that for you, but you should always make sure you're clearing by making your way towards the center after you clear your marble. If you notice a marble is on the other side of where you just cleared yours and it has full HP, you're making your way towards the center. As long as you have decent movement with your character, it should be fine to take care of it in time, but if you do not, it's probably best not to worry about it and have a bit of faith in your team that they'll have the right tools to clear it. If they do not, then you might just have to fail that one set and allow the team to readjust for the next set. So long as you worry about your own side, it's less likely that a panic decision to clear a marble across the map doesn't end up causing a ton of chaos on the off chance that you don't even manage to clear it anyway, and now you're on the other side of the map with 2 or 3 players that decided to panic run towards it as well. Then you're just gonna fail that and the very next set, and it's just gonna spiral, and that'll, it's bad news. Don't do that. So just focus on your side mainly and you should be fine. As for the 3 swords portion of the 7 trumpets, I personally always go for the Sword of Renunciation, as it can be fairly annoying. This is the sword that spawns over in this location. The next worst one would probably have to be the Sword of Reputation. You simply need to just destroy all 3 of these swords before the gauge fills completely and you'll have done it. So this last part is just some additional tips when playing with other players. The best way to gear up is making sure your damage is up to par and your stun is reliably high. But in terms of gameplay, I'd suggest being conscious of your spacing from other players. It helps a lot not to be bunched up on top of each other for a variety of Lucy's attacks. Even his basic swings can be very annoying for other players if you're constantly dodging through Lucy, making him, sort of start swinging in a different direction than he was originally. The best way to dodge whenever you have aggro is simply away, or if you want to be even more helpful, slightly away and slightly to one side so that you're not dragging the boss super far and your team is having to adjust their positions to even land a hit. Also, those annoying crystals he places on the ground? They're almost never a real threat immediately, but many players have experienced getting dropped by these through either another player stepping on them or Lucy doing some sort of pushback attack and sending you flying into them. When it comes to players stepping on them, just be mindful of where a player looks like they are standing or heading. It's too risky to trust every player that they will take their time to avoid them, so do your best to just be ready to dodge. It's really tough dodging on reaction, so toss in a couple safe dodges anytime it looks like it's about to happen. As far as you yourself stepping on them, well, it shouldn't have to be said that you want to avoid stepping on them. But just like I mentioned, some people can disregard these fairly easy, and it's definitely worth it to just stop whatever powerful attack you were building up for if by some chance you will indeed land on the crystal. It's simply not worth it, and this fight isn't a damage race. It's mainly about survival. And since this guide is about helping you complete these runs more often, you should tape this to the front of your noggin and make sure you're not being clumsy with these types of things. Also, a massive tip for anybody that really hates when he pushes you away into a crystal: just be mindful of where your back is facing while attacking Lucy. You should always see at least 2 crystals on your screen. If you're able to, I'd suggest either turning your camera behind you to see if you're clear, or if your camera control isn't the best, you should at least take advantage of the crystals that you can see and immediately place yourself between them by running over to the other side of Lucy. Trust me, this pays off in the long run and is well worth the attention paid towards it. That's it for my guide on the Lucy raid. I hope this helps you or your friends, and by all means sound off in the comments if there's any helpful tips that you can provide. I also stream Granblue every day around 6 p.m. EST over on twitch.tv. You can find the link to my channel in the description below this video. I usually have an open lobby for people to join, so if you're interested in that or would like some extra help clearing the missions, head on over there and say hello. Also, be sure to leave a like, it helps out tremendously, and consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this from your very own. Alright, thank you, bye bye, bye bye.